What if you knew how much you should save to live the type of lifestyle that you want to live? What if you knew what that lifestyle looks like right now based on how you currently live? Would you make the same decision or would you make a different decision? And that's when I realized, looking in the market, no one else was giving people that choice. The choice to empower them with the knowledge of making great decisions now.
Today's guest is Royden Greaves, founder of Jarvis, a platform that's making pensions simple, smart, and accessible. He's on a mission to help people take control of their retirement with personalized plans, smart tools, and a clear path to financial independence. Royden is challenging the outdated systems that have left far too many people confused and unprepared for retirement.
So what is the real driver? What is your why? Why did you start Jarvis?
You have a £36 billion problem.
Is that the total of lost pensions today?
£36 billion. On average, you're talking about £10,000 per person. There's nothing deliberate that's being done in order for that problem to happen. And in the same way, there's nothing deliberate being done for that problem to be solved.
Most people might know who their pension is with. They probably don't know what it's worth, and they definitely don't know what it's going to be worth when they retire.
There's the perception that pensions are for older people, and I don't need to worry about that right now because I'm not near retirement.
How can the individuals that are listening to this, what are the things that they can do to start to look to retrieve their share of that 36 billion pot that you mentioned?
So look for anything that's...
Welcome to Founders Stories, where we deep dive into the journals of existing and emerging business pioneers. I'm Donna, and I'm founder of The Engine, and I'm joined today by Royden Greaves, a powerhouse in the wealth management space, known for his passion for enlightening the world about financial freedom, despite people's beginnings. So welcome to Founders Stories. Thank you for coming.
Thanks for having me.
So I think I've known you for a little while now, and I would actually urge anybody watching this to maybe go and make themselves a cup of tea and bed in. If you're in the car, you might want to pull over for this, because Royden's actually got the most amazing story, and I think you've had me kind of close to tears before now, so I don't want to oversell it. Let's not raise expectations too much. But Royden, before we talk about Jarvis, which is how we've come together and how the majority of people watching this will know you. Like a lot of our founders, you kind of have emerged onto the scene very, very quickly. You know, Entrepreneur of the Year awards, nominations all over the place, and lots of success. So you can't help but see that. I think today would be really good just to talk about the journey to get there, because I certainly didn't know you before Jarvis, and I've learnt a lot about you since, and it'd be great to find out a little bit more about that. So what were your kind of earliest memories of wanting to do something by yourself?
Well, firstly, before I go into that, like I'm a product of an amazing team, and I could do the things that I do because people have incredible ways of helping me to shine. So I represent that team is the first thing. And from perspective of doing things for myself, I think it was always deeper than that. It was always the ability to see the art of the possible. And if you believe something or you think about something, there are sometimes ways to make those things true. And I always had the ability to think of crazy things, and I would try and do them. So I, for one, believe that success is a product of a lot of failure along the way. So I've had a lot of them in many different areas. So from a very, very young age, I've always pursued ideas. And what I do today is no different. It's a pursuit of ideas. So probably from single digits, I've always wanted to do stuff.
Yeah.
Whatever those things may be.
Yeah, exactly. So as a kind of teenager, as a student, what kind of student were you? Were you always trying to think of new things and different ways to shape things?
I've always been thinking of how, like, why things work the way they do, and always believed that individual or collection of human beings made them that way. So as a result, believe rightly or wrongly that I could sometimes change that way that things are done. So when you think of an idea, that's the first thing. Then you commit that idea to paper. That's another thing. And these ideas weren't always grandiose, and some of them were non-functional. Like I always like the idea of flying. And I remember from a very young age, I tried building things to fly from cardboard boxes, which of course it wasn't going to work. But I'm always trying something to do something. So whenever I even have spare time, I'm thinking of something creative in some way.
I would guarantee right now that there are so many entrepreneurs that listen to this that did similar things when they were younger, try to break things and try to remold things and create, like you say, the kind of art of the possible. So let's take it back for everybody. Well, actually forward from where we are now, but back from Jarvis. So somebody who is ultra creative, very, very high, moral compass, which we'll talk about in a second. Very ethical, and entrepreneurial, creative, wants to break the mold. Found yourself in financial services. So how did you go from trying to make cardboard boxes fly to shirt, tie, desk, 9 to 5, rat race, just surrounded by rich people?
Well, I believe that if you're occupant of Western society, that is built on the foundations of financial services. So I studied engineering at university, and you had the university I went to, you basically had students from two parts. You had the students who did medicine, you had the students who did engineering. The students who did medicine, most of them ended up being in that field. The ones who did engineering, half of them ended up in engineering and another half ended up in finance. And that would always spark a level of curiosity as to why. And when you look at the opportunities that working in financial services affords, is beyond money, but it comes down to the things that you can do with money. And when you look at the educational system at any age, you have very little opportunity to learn about money and how to handle money. Like, what is it? Is often an ally, but a poorly used ally in our lives. And working in financial services affords you to understand about money. So I'm really grateful for that opportunity, and being in a position to pass on some of that is highly important. But if I was to start all the way again, I think I'll follow a very similar path.
That's really cool that you wouldn't do anything differently. Even the mistakes, the pitfalls, all happens for a reason, right? Well, I'm definitely going to try and dig into some of those in just a second. So at this point, did you feel as though you did have your eyes open in terms of kind of the way that you were brought up, the education that you had? Was there a lot of surprises when you went into FS and discovered actually how the economy runs? Or do you feel as though that's something you were afforded, that kind of layer of education that you're saying a lot of people don't have?
Well, growing up, so I was born in the Caribbean, in Montserrat, in the Eastern Caribbean, tiny island next to Antigua. And the thing I always held true, from memory till now, is the idea of growth. And I believe that you constantly have opportunities to learn new things, but you don't always know how you're going to apply that knowledge until at some point in the future you're then like, that's useful that I've been through that experience. So for me, I think that yes, my background has made a difference, but my background wasn't divorced from most people's backgrounds. Like, I grew up in a fairly average household. I lived a very normal life relative to most of the individuals that I know. And the only thing that I would say it has been materially different is through, home environment, school environment. I've always been taught to try. And failure has never been the problem, as most people have it in lives, and they've been taught that, and sometimes rightly so. So because the thing at the foremost of my mind is to try, and you're not held back by the possibility of failure, which is a likely outcome in most instances, it then meant that I was able to learn a lot of different things very quickly. Some of them like, don't do it again, that doesn't work. But you keep trying, you keep growing. And whenever I felt comfortable, I've always felt a little bit restless because I'm not trying or learning something new. So the whole idea of falling is something that I've learned over time to don't worry about falling. Fall forward and get up and keep going, but it's still growing and moving in the right direction.
Yeah, that's really cool. And again, something that is so important if you're going to be in business, because it hardly ever goes right the first time, usually not the second, sometimes not even the third. So that ability to keep moving forwards, I think, is actually something that I'm starting to think, as I'm doing more of these talks, something that's kind of hardwired into founders. They're all very different, very different, very individual, but I do think there are similarities, and that ability to actually take those learning experiences and use them as fuel to go forwards is something that I think is really cool and unique and just fascinates me. And so, I mean, we are going to talk a lot about money today. And I think a lot of the people that tune into this particular episode will be interested in economics and those things because that's where your expertise are. And so I find it interesting that you went into that field, but not to work in that field, but to actually make a difference. And, I mentioned earlier, you are somebody that does have a lot of ethics. And we've spoken recently about, you finding it almost unacceptable that people do not have the access to the right type of education around their finances, what their future looks like. So how much did that, I'm interested to know how much of that kind of fueled you're in the right platform then, you're in financial services, you're going into, you were kind of doing wealth management, so not exactly talking to the average person, you were dealing with very wealthy people. So how did you join the dots there, and what made you then go, actually, no, I don't want to make the rich richer, I want to do something for the good? Big question. So
Yes, and just breaking that down into parts, the thing that connects us most as society is the desire to improve the lives of ourselves and the lives of the people around us. And that is true irrespective of financial disparity. Now, at one end of the spectrum, you have a situation that the individuals that might lack the knowledge to do that for themselves, they found themselves into the position that they could find other people to help them who have that knowledge. If you're in the same position at the other side of the spectrum, then you don't have that same opportunity afforded you. So I think that when it comes to, helping and empowering people, the things that you learn when you're working in financial services about, okay, how do people do things when they have resources? What are the things that they do? And you realize that, let me give you a practical example. Most of us in society have credit cards, and we use credit cards to buy stuff that we want to pay for over a period of time. Now, with a bit more knowledge, some people use those same credit cards to collect various forms of rewards that are used to go towards their holidays. So buying the same object like this sofa we're sitting on could actually help with your drinks when you're on holiday versus just, I'm paying a bill. So being able to creatively use the resources around you is something that, as soon as you explain that to someone, hey, here's some of the things that you can actually do, they're like, that's so simple. But yes, it is. But if you don't know about it, it still falls in the land of the complex. So I think that everything is simple when you understand it. And I think we have a duty as people, irrespective of your discipline, to empower others to make better decisions.
And your decision to go into business, be a founder, be a CEO, I genuinely believe, and people can raise their eyebrows on this as much as they like, but I genuinely believe that your end game is not to be a billionaire. And that is the one thing I talked about, founders being wired differently, but all the same. That is the one thing that definitely I think makes you stand out. So, but everybody who goes into business is and has to have a goal. They have to have a North Star. They have to have something that they're doing it for, the why, the reason to keep going. You could probably make a hell of a lot of money doing what you did as a job before you went into business. So what is the real driver? What is your why? If it isn't to, retire at 45 and go and live on a yacht and never never want for anything ever again, what is the why, and why did you start Jarvis?
Well, firstly, I sometimes get a bit seasick, so I won't be pursuing the yacht.
Well, you do, yes, yeah.
But
yeah.
the thing is, when I sit back and I analyze the things that makes me most happy in life, is when I see the people that I care most about really happy. When I see the people that I care most about achieving the things that they want to achieve, and whenever I have the ability to effect that change in someone and help them to not only pursue but to achieve their goals, that makes me extremely happy. I sometimes am motivated by material things, and a lot of times I don't get a level of satisfaction even when achieving those material things. But seeing a human being transcend the limits of their norm or the limits of their full potential at that point in time, because I believe that your potential is always growing or could always grow. So you could become better than your present best. I fundamentally believe that. That makes me happy. Now, imagine if I don't have to limit that to a set of individuals around me. Imagine if that could be done at a national level. That's truly something that changes a whole generation. Because I believe we only have for a period of time. You blink and then you're gone. You become history, and that history sometimes gets forgotten. So that's really important. If we dig a level below that and you bring it closer to home, and as I said, I'm born in Montserrat, an island that up until the early 1990s was at the forefront of economic growth and tourism development in the Eastern Caribbean, suffered from a long line of events, starting back in 1989, when he had one of the most powerful hurricanes that have seen our part of the world. And then a series of earthquakes, and then in 95 a volcano that decided to stay in our lives and occupy our lives for a couple of decades. So what that actually meant is that despite having the fortune of being a part of the United Kingdom, so it's a British territory, it didn't see the type of economic growth that it should have done during that time. So a lot of the other islands surpassed where Montserrat was, and certainly now is. So bringing that all together, the key thing that happens during those times, I believe, is that sometimes people lose hope. People forget how to win. And for those who follow cricket as an example, like you go back into the 70s, the 80s, the West Indies was the only team to talk about. You come forward to today, even when you had the greats of Brian Lara, they still didn't win, because as a team, they forgot how to win. So one of the things that's really important to me is doing the little that I possibly be able to do to remind the people of the country how to win. Because when you could start effecting change amongst a set of individuals, and you start effecting change on a national level, and you could create the country that will stand once again as a symbol of aspiration for others in the region, then you could start building a regional presence to allow for the next generation to truly pursue great. Because if you don't have people believing in the pursuit of greatness, and that's the advancement of society, is what I mean by that, then you don't have a bright future to look forward to. So a combination of those things are the things that really drive the future that I'm currently striving to live in.
That's so cool. I told you. I warned you, people. This stuff can really get you, particularly on a very hot day. Yeah. I mean, this just sets me on fire. I absolutely love it. I think any of my fellow sales leaders who are listening to this all need to go and get a big sign for the office saying, guys, don't ever forget how to win, and put it on the wall, because it is such a good mantra for success. And you're right, we see it in football teams. Once they have a couple of bad games, they just can't seem to pull it back, and then they just have terrible seasons, and then they're relegated and they never make it back. It is so, so true. We must never, ever forget how to win. And I think it's such a powerful message. Really, really cool. Jarvis.
Yes.
So here you are with all of these aspirations to make change, insane amount of duty of care to people, really, really excited about enhancing lives. You've got all of that. That's in you. And then you've also got a lot of knowledge and experience moving forward from the financial services space. At what point did you sit there in your house or wherever it was at the time, hopefully you'll remember the time, and go, actually, I'm going to put all that together and I am going to build a pension app? What happened there? What was it? And I don't actually know this, so I'm interested.
So I remember sitting on my desk. It was back in 2021, and I was seeing some news about a company that over many years have done very well in helping people to aggregate their lost pension pots. And they're fantastic at what they do, and I have a lot of respect for them. And I remember sitting thinking, as I was doing some work, what does it really mean, though? If you had 5, 10 pensions in different places, and you brought them all together in one place, the picture that went through my mind, which is still very important, is the equivalent of having a desperate set of files, and you're scanning them, and then you bring them together back in the day on a zip disk.
On a zip, yeah.
I was like, okay, that's really cool. But it's still the same thing, just in a different format. But if you cast your mind's eye back to, when I said that most are not financially educated, unfortunately, if you don't know what £10,000 today means to you in the future, if you don't know what £100,000 means, is it the right amount? Is it the wrong amount? What should you be doing? What should you be saving? And if we just reflect on the point that, and let's just remember this number, £300. It could be a little, it could be a lot, depending on circumstances. £300, if a baby was gifted with that opportunity to have saved into an account, a normal account, growing at a normal rate. And you then fast forward in time, and now, rather than in 2025, we sitting in the distant future at, let's say, 2055. That baby, who's now a grown adult, would have £1 million in their account. So all I spoke about was not the difference in the amount of money. I spoke about the difference in the amount of time. So you bring that back to your question about, that moment. In that moment, I was thinking, what if people actually knew the impact of what they were doing? What if you knew how much you should save to live the type of lifestyle that you want to live? What if you knew what that lifestyle looked like right now based on how you currently live? Would you make the same decision or would you make a different decision? The answer is unknown, but what is known is that you now have the information to make an educated choice. And giving people the choice, I think, is something that many pursue, but very few have the opportunity to do. And that's when I realized, looking in the market, no one else was giving people that choice. The choice to empower them with the knowledge of making great decisions now. And with pensions being the second largest store of wealth in the country, second only to property, and with the government's correct initiative to encourage people to save more into, let's just call them some accounts, because they're not much different to bank accounts, for a time in the future where they need to look after themselves, having less time that they're giving to someone that's giving them some money, their employers. What if people had that knowledge? And yes, it is a multi-trillion-pound industry. Yes, it is taking on giants in the land. But as I said, All great companies, all great ideas, they're started by people. So surrounding yourselves with great people, I believe that it was possible. So we then went on that pursuit to go and do it.
Let's just double click on that then, because if you are in the UK, you will ordinarily have access to some sort of pension. I would guess that most people might know who their pension is with. They probably don't know what it's worth, and they definitely don't know what it's going to be worth when they retire. They probably don't know how to access it, but they might know who it's with. How has that happened? Like, why is this huge amount of money and something that's so important, why is it almost just being kind of just tucked away? And why is you mentioned the giants, and full respect, you are taking on some of the biggest names in financial services, and you're taking them head on. You're actually going after their members with such a powerful message, which is, open your eyes, because your eyes are closed right now. And I think it's super brave, and which is why I love being involved in the company, because I love that we're being brave enough to do that. But how did it happen? Why have these kind of larger companies, I'm not saying they've done anything unethical, but why have we not had access to things like, a calculator which can show us what the future might look like, when these companies have got a budget for R&D which makes the Jarvis budget literally look like, a drop in the ocean? Is there any reason why, controversially maybe, we've not already got this access as people in the country?
Well, I think when you resolve into the land of normal, all the things that have been done in the past were commonly accepted to just be the way things are done. And that's always true in the course of history. So if you go back well over 100 years and you think about the idea of flight, that was crazy. It's just not done. Like, people use boats to go from anywhere to anywhere that doesn't have land between them, or they use horse and carriage. Like, that was normal. If you think about the whole idea that we have light right now, that was not normal. It wasn't the thing to be done. So the person pursuing it was probably crazy. 1,000 experiments for one outcome. Most people wouldn't even made it to 100. If you think about the ability for your very audience to hear and see this very conversation we're having, never to have met us in person, think about how crazy that is if we stepped back 25, 30, 50 years. So whenever you hit the crossroads of the art of the possible or change, you will always be uncomfortable and way outside of norm. So I wouldn't blame the providers that exist today for what they have and where they are, because they were doing and are doing what is normal and was acceptable. But as soon as people find out that there's another way, could you now imagine not being able to have a video call for a meeting? Could you now imagine not being able to speak to a friend or family for free via WhatsApp rather than sending a text message? Could you imagine not being able to go on a holiday? Think about that. That's what the future would look like when most of the country has the opportunity to be using companies like Jarvis. And we're not the only ones. There are others that are pursuing a similar dream. But you have to first create the opportunities for people to know that there is an alternative. And that's all that's happening. We're creating the opportunity for people to know that there's an alternative. And the reason why pensions are the way they are, in my view, it stems back from the history of what a pension is. And there's the perception that pensions are for older people. And I don't need to worry about that right now because I'm not near retirement. Now, let's give that some context to put that in the world of, okay, people are not so crazy for thinking that. Because if you go back to the Victorians and that time, they retired human beings because humans were at the core of the economic fabric. They were at the core of the Industrial Revolution. So when you reach a certain point in time, you were no longer of productive value. Your productive input went down. So they had to make sure that you were retired. You're now in retirement. And as you step forward, if you come to, more recent history, as recent as the 1990s, and still elements exist today, companies knew that there would become a point in time where they would need to look after their people in a certain way. So they would put aside some money, and, some may be familiar with the term final salary, as in the final level of gratitude we're going to give to you. They were doing that on the employee's behalf. So if someone was earning, let's say, £1,000 per month, then the company would have been putting away on their behalf completely, with no input from them whatsoever, between £200 to £300 every single month. So when you now come to that point of, because you worked with that same company for 40 years and you're now age 60, they put away all of that money. So whatever that final salary that you are now on, they will be able to give you 2/3, as an example, of that final salary that you're on for the rest of your life. So you didn't need to understand it. You didn't need to understand where the money went, how it worked. You didn't need to understand how to save it or who to talk. You didn't need to understand any of that. So if you think about the generation today, they're descendants of the generation that was normal. So passed down through stories and bits of reading is not the idea that you need to look after this yourself. So you now step forward 2000s plus, where these were becoming less normal because they costed companies, as I said, a lot of money. Companies no longer offered them. So you're now in this new world of, I have no more knowledge, but now this thing that actuaries, so people who do lots of math with numbers, and, lawyers, bankers, and the various sorts were looking after, us as normal society now have to look after all of it ourselves without the education to get to that point. As I said, actuaries, these are highly educated people.
Fulham's
There we go.
Yeah.
That look after this, right? All the number buffs, the mathies. So it's no surprise that it's chaos. And it's I don't want to know about that, because it's so confusing because I lack the education to deal with it. And it feels so complicated that, no, forget this. So when I move from one job to another, because it's law, in the same way that companies, they have certain insurances to protect their staff in place, I pick up these pots of things that known as pensions, that whatever, I'll look at that at some point in the future. I now move address. I move home, which is normal for people to want to change their homes. So the pension provider still has the old address. And because it's not important, I never reached out to them to say, I'm changing address. So 10 years later, I'm like, I think I got some pensions when I used to work at X company name, but I can't remember who it's with. They don't really know how to get in touch with you either. So now we have a lost pension pot. Multiply that by people and the number of times they move jobs, you have a £36 billion problem.
Is that the total of lost pensions today?
£36 billion. On average, you're talking about £10,000 per person. So if people knew that, hey, this is like a bank account, you just can't access it until you reach a certain age because you might spend the money. So we're just making sure that you have some money in the future. That's all it is, right? And is invested. And let's talk about that. What does invested mean? Invested means that you part of modern society, meaning that you have a tiny, tiny share of Apple rather than just using their devices. It means you have a tiny, tiny share of Google rather than just using it for search. You have a tiny share of what the UK government's doing with their money rather than just simply paying it in taxes. That's what it really means, invested. And so not really engaging with it because it's scary. I don't like knowing what the truth might be. How many of us like going to doctors? You're not always certain what they're going to tell you. So you're like, I'll just wait. I might feel a bit better. I'll take some paracetamol. So in the same way, if you now make that norm, that's now culture, you now have a thing where it's pensions, I don't know what's going on. I'll deal with that at some point. And I understand that. I get it.
So there's been in your opinion, nothing that's deliberate that's happened to create this 36 billion? in lost pensions, which I'm sure is getting everyone's heart rate right up right now. And I'm sure there's a few papers being ruffled in people's drawers and files and things that are just kind of gathering dust at their houses. Like, right, I'm going to go and get my share of that 36 billion. If you're listening, go out and get it. And then move it over to Jarvis because we'll look after it. But so it's not really something that's. I mean, it's a lot of money, right? Where's it going?
But I think you're absolutely right. And there's nothing deliberate that's being done in order for that problem to happen. And in the same way, there's nothing deliberately being done for that problem to be solved. And so we effectively sleepwalking ourselves into a growing nightmare. And to resolve that nightmare, if people understood that they had £10,000 in a bank account, a number of bank accounts, and if people really understood that every time I put away £1, the government, who are constantly saying we're going to probably raise some taxes, they're going to give me back 20 pence every single time and say, like, right, that tax that you paid to me, like, I'll give it back to you on that given pound that you earned. Or if you're earning a bit more, it might be 40 pence, as an example. I do think that the engagement would be different. Like, £10,000 is a lot of money for anyone. I don't really care how rich you are. Is a lot of money. And so I think the awareness of that will start changing. And we're starting to see changes in the market, but still we have that level of perceived complexity. And when you put all the rules and the regulations and stuff around it, yes, it feels complicated. But in the same way that it took, not so long ago, 6 weeks plus to open a bank account, or when there's a transaction happening, you wait days for it to show up on your statement, as opposed to, I remember the first time I went to Pret to test out these new banks, I was like, I paid for something, I saw it come up straight away, I was like, this is pretty cool. In the same way that these changes taken place when it was not normal, and now it just is, that's the same future that I foresee when it comes to pensions, that people are like, cool, I know what's going on, I understand it, and I can interact with it in the same way that we're not scared to interact with our bank accounts. I do see that day.
That's great. So actually, Jarvis is slightly more than, and you've set out to be more than a disruptor. It's actually becoming the light bulb instead of the candle.
Absolutely.
And the norm.
Absolutely. And I do hope, and I do look forward to other pension companies copying what we do, because the thing is, for this future that I speak about to be a reality, you have to have others following suit. We can't do it alone. Yes, we do have a highly innovative pension that could be used for both, auto-enrollment, so that's like your default pension that you have at work, as well as just any individual. It's highly sophisticated in terms of how it's designed, but ultra simple in terms of how it's used. For that to truly take foot, and for us to truly have the level of success that we want to have, this is not just about Jarvis. It's about every single pension company in the country joining forces, following our lead, to simplify the communication that we use to people, and to make sure that we let people know that they have a future that is worth living in.
Amazing. And let's just finish on what's next. So Jarvis is still a relatively new company, probably older than maybe some would think, because it's literally just started to, well, the official launch has just happened. Now, you've already won some pretty major partnerships with some very, very exciting payroll software companies. So congratulations. I think I know a little bit about payroll software, and I think it's an absolute no-brainer for software companies to be seen to be part of this evolution of pensions. So I think that's a really smart move, but still very much a startup. Still very lean in terms of the team. Great team, having said that, but very, very lean and very much in startup mode. So with your founder hat on, kind of what's next, and what do you see the road in front being like as a startup founder? Because regardless of how this is going to kind of take over the whole landscape of pensions moving forward, you've still got to get to next week. You've still got to get to next month, next quarter, which is the biggest challenge for any founder. And, you run quite lean. You're not constantly inviting investors, and you don't have that kind of vanity around, oh, we've just taken 100 million and all of that. So I think you've tried to do it not on a shoestring, but as lean as you possibly can. So kind of what's the plan moving forwards, and how do you see Jarvis getting to its next milestones as a startup, and and being successful before the revenue comes piling in, which I'm very confident it will?
So I think that our approach to investment and team directly correlates to our approach to what we want to deliver to clients. So yes, we're backed by 3 UK VCs and a Silicon Valley VC, but because we want to deliver value at the right price for the clients that we serve, it's really important that we keep our costs reflective of that future. And we took a deliberate focus on individuals who be least served in society. And what I mean by that is how it, as you said, I worked in financial services, like the ones with the most money also pay the most money. And so what we wanted to build, and what we have now built, is a banking grade, private banking level solution that could be used by everyone. And we wanted to work with the temporary workforce, the contingent workforce, the person who, has to make sure that they get their paycheck this week to buy food next week. Because those are the individuals who have the least amount of financial resources to get the type of financial education that I spoke to. And so we took a very deliberate aim on focusing on the umbrella industry, the temp workforce industry, and payroll software companies that work with those industries. So now we do have full coverage across the payroll landscape in that sector, and that's something that we worked tirelessly to get to. So I'm really pleased that we're now there. And the feature for us is making sure that we complete that mission to be the default pension provider for temp and contingent workers, and we're well on our way to achieving that. Once we have done that, the next thing that we do look forward to doing is being slightly more involved in shaping policy that before we could reach the rest of the market, the policy could help to shape the rest of the market. And that's, policy around the default contribution level. So if you remember when I said that everyone was okay, those golden pensions, about 30% of their earnings were going into pensions. Now, I'm not suggesting for a moment that the 8% default increases to 30%. But what I am saying is that we need to find creative ways of letting people, reclaim even additional taxes, that rather than going to projects that the government find as important to themselves, that individuals could have going to their pensions for themselves. And one of the things that we will continue to do, and well on the roadmap, is showing employers how they could save even more money with the work that they're doing through some of our salary sacrifice initiatives. We're looking for that to be market leading. So being the leading pension provider when it comes to that, making it easy for employers, making it easy for individuals to understand, right, I could actually save an additional £10 on my £100 through tax breaks that I didn't even know existed. Making that more common knowledge is what we're going to be doing. And once we have done that, we will then continue to look at other parts of the market that we want to work with. So we're not going to be all things to all people, highly focused on the individuals who have the least amount of support. And then we look at other groups of individuals that have the least amount of support. And those are the cohorts that we're going to be most focused on delivering value to.
So those guys all of a sudden will have access to the same level of financial visibility as, I suppose, previously you would need like your own kind of wealth manager or financial advisor. I'm very passionate about the temp workforce. I was a temp consultant, and there isn't really, well, even for somebody who is a normal kind of average wage wouldn't ever think, oh, okay, well, I'm not too sure about what the future looks like, and therefore I'm going to go and pay an individual to come around and sit in my living room and map all of that out for me and tell me what that looks like. So it's super, super exciting that, you know, and very kind of fitting with the age that we're in now, that, you know, normal people will have that level of financial advice in their back pocket, literally, because you're actually building that into the Jarvis product.
Like for us, you know, our viewers, if you are fortunate enough to have a nest pension without having to think anymore or do anything else, your employer could afford you a Jarvis pension, no extra cost to you, to the employer, and, you know, similar sort of you know, setup to in terms of nest from a pricing standpoint. But most importantly, you now have a material change in terms of the financial education and well-being that you now have as an individual, with real guidance, enlightened by simplification. So Jarvis as the solution from a members and employees and individuals perspective is as easy to use as any modern day app, and as simple to understand as any modern banking solution that you may use. So that is a feature that's already here. It was a feature that I envisaged, and it's a feature that we're now living in.
I think that's very good what you said earlier as well about it not being any different to a bank account. You just can't touch it yet. And I think you're absolutely right. I personally, I'm going to plug Jarvis. I have the Jarvis app, and it sits in the finance bit of my phone with all of my bank accounts, and it's no different to me now. I'll check my Monzo, I might check one of my other accounts, I'll check my Jarvis account, and that's just for later. And then I might say, do you know what, I don't really fancy working till then, and I wonder how much I'd need to put in if I wanted to just bring that forward a little bit, so I can literally take my finger and move it and ask Jarvis what I would need to do today in order to finance tomorrow looking like that. So you may have actually reduced the time it's going to take me to retire in Ibiza by 5 or 10 years. Thank you so much for that. Let's finish on a couple of pearls of wisdom. I normally just ask for one as a founder, but I actually feel as though you've got so much to offer from an advisory perspective that I'm going to ask you for two. I'm going to be a bit mean. So both hats in any order. Firstly, from a founder perspective, you know, what would you advise anybody that is going through that similar journey, whether it be, you know, going out for that first investment, making that first step, leaving the job, whichever one you think you can add the most value to. And secondary to that, how can the individuals that are listening to this, what are the kind of small things that they can do to start to look to retrieve their share of that 36 billion pot that you mentioned? Because I can't get that number out of my head, and I think we should start to diminish it.
It's double the shortfall that the Chancellor is looking to fill. So my simple message to anyone that's pursuing something, so they don't need to be a founder. And the reason I say that is because if you look at data, by 2030, more than half of the global workforce are going to be self-employed if the trends continue. So people who are presently employed means that those individuals will eventually be self-employed, will eventually be founders of their own destiny. So people who are pursuing things is to seek to put yourself into a position to be told no on something positive and progressive. Because the more you could put yourself into that position, the closer you are to receiving the bridge that you need to get to the next part of your journey. And if you're never in a position to be told no, then I don't think that you're in the strongest possible position to be realizing your truest potential. And as it relates to the second part of your question around simple things that we can do, it's to think differently. So think about, how can I use exactly what I'm doing right now to more of my benefit? So one of the most valuable commodities we have is time. underrated sometimes until it's too late. And if there are things that you're already doing, so let's take, for example, something as simple as the groceries. Rather than necessarily going into your app or your supermarket and putting down the same things every single time and buying them, how about you just have a preset list that's already saved in whichever your favorite supermarket is, in the online app. So when you go there, because we all pretty much eat the same sort of things within a boundary, you click one button, the basket's full, you take out or add some new things, and it's done. Now, the reason why I'm saying things like this is because that time is now what you could use to educate yourself on new areas. Like, everyone's talking about AI, but most are limited to only one tool. But there are thousands. So empowering yourself with knowledge empowers yourself with the opportunity to pursue something new, something that you might not even be aware of yet. And finding time in your life, I think, is one of the most valuable things you could do. So look for anything that's repeated, anything that you're doing again and again and again, and put a process in place to simplify it. So you could automate it. You unlock time, because most of us, our times are full. So if we could free up little nuggets here and there, like imagine if you're on the train and you're scrolling through, I see it all the time. You go to Instagram, then you go to Facebook, then they switch across to email, then they go to WhatsApp, constantly pulling down to see if there's a latest message. How about you pulling down to see if there's a latest nugget of information that you can learn something new, something that you might find valuable in your life in the future? So rather than huge change, transformational stuff, how about we use really simple words of stacking your present habits with something small that adds value to future you. So, 10 years looking back, and you say, I'm really thankful to myself and what I'd done back then, because I wouldn't be here today if I didn't do that. So the two things, is putting yourself in a position to be told no for positive things, and finding tiny little nuggets of time, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, to learn something new.
Because you're right, actually, there'll become a point in all our lives, sadly, that 5 or 10 minutes would have been really valuable. So, I agree. And I think it's the whole kind of atomic habits thing, is that, these things will then become habitual. And that's how you'll then start to live your life. And you're absolutely right. I think we don't appreciate time sometimes. And just finding an extra 5 or 10 minutes in the day could unlock all sorts of ideas and create that might be where you have that light bulb moment to say, hey, I'm a really nice person and I know a lot about pensions. Why don't I just join the two together and leave my really highly paid job and go into business? It might actually create that moment. Had you not found those efficiencies in your day, you may not have had that 5 or 10 minutes where you had that great idea and hopefully, sounds like really made a huge change to the whole world. Well, so Royden, thank you so much. I think everybody is going to absolutely love this episode. So obviously I'd love people to reach out to you if they wanted to know more, and I know that time is always something that you're very, very generous with. I hope that's okay if people want to know more about you and Jarvis, but we'll wrap it up there, and I'll say thank you to everybody for listening, and we'll see you again soon on Founder Stories.